She set the lantern down on the third step from the bottom. She did not want to carry it any further. The chamber she had come to wake was older than any prayer her order knew, and she had been told that what waited inside was a man. She did not believe it, but she had been told. The body at the center of the room had been still for so long that the moss had grown a name across its chest. Vines passed through the gaps in the armor as if the armor were stone. Something held him there, old and iron, and set ages ago by hands that had been dust for so many ages there was no name for the people who had owned them. He looked, she thought, like something the earth had finished with. She had been told that waking him would be a gift to Oolacile, to the world. The chamber had been sealed for so long that the lock had rusted into the door, and the door had rusted into the wall, and the wall was indistinguishable from the stone around it. She had to break through 3 thresholds to reach him. Each one left marks on her hands. She noticed the marks but did not stop. She had been told this was important. She believed the people who had told her. She was wrong about them, and she did not know it yet, and she would not survive long enough to find out. Take a slow breath. There is no hurry. We have the whole night. The story you are about to hear is the story of what happens when a kindness is built on a misunderstanding so deep that no one alive any longer remembers what was actually being protected, or from whom. The man on the floor of that chamber had a name. He had once been somebody, and what he was holding in the hand that lay open against the stone, what he had been holding when they put him to sleep all those ages ago, is the thing the world will never give back to him. It will be the only thing he asks for before the end. It will not be returned. There is a darkness in this world that the histories will call the abyss. They will speak of it as a corruption, a sickness, a stain. They will be wrong about what it is. It is the simplest thing in the universe, and the saddest. It is what love looks like when it has nowhere left to go. To understand what Manus became, you have to understand what was lost. Not lost to him. He was already buried before any of this began. Lost to the people who woke him. Oolacile was a kingdom built on light. Its sorceries shone gold, the kind of gold that only old things can be. The color of dust caught in a window, the color of late afternoon through stained glass. The scholars of Oolacile did not study magic the way other kingdoms did. They listened for it. They believed every spell already existed, somewhere, waiting to be found, and that the work of a sorcerer was less invention than excavation. To learn was to listen carefully enough that the world handed you something it had been keeping. The gardens of Oolacile were said to be the most beautiful in the known lands, not because they were grand, because they were patient. The trees there had been allowed to grow into whatever shape their roots wanted. The paths were laid where people had already chosen to walk, not where someone had decided people should. There was a quality to the air in Oolacile, the histories say, that made you feel as though something important was about to be remembered, not learned, remembered, as though the city itself had been built on top of a thought it was trying to recover. The princess of Oolacile was a young woman named Dusk, who in better times wore a hood embroidered with the same gold that ran through the city's lamps. She would be relevant to this story shortly. She was not the cause of what happened. She was a person who got caught in it. Hold on to her name. The scholars of Oolacile, in their pursuit of older and stranger sorceries, eventually began to look downward. There were stories that the deepest magic in the world was not in the sky, but under it. Buried things, old things, things that had been put away because they were dangerous, or because they were powerful, or because someone, long ago, had loved them and not been able to bear destroying them. There is a difference between those three. The scholars of Oolacile, by the end, would no longer be in any condition to know which of the three applied to the man under their city. There is a detail I want you to keep with you through everything else that happens in this story. The thing he had been holding when they put him to sleep, the thing his hand was open around when the moss began to grow over him, was small. Small enough that nothing in what survives of those ages thought to mention what it was. Small enough that the scholars who came down with their lanterns did not see it. Small enough that, in the dark that came later, when his madness was reaching out across stone and sky for the only thing it remembered wanting, the world would not understand what he was looking for. They would think he was reaching for them. He was not. The chamber where Manus slept had been sealed for so long that its purpose had been forgotten. The records that survive from those ages do not name him. They do not call him a monster, or a god, or a king. They simply say there was someone under Oolacile, and there had always been. And there was a reason he had been put down there, and the reason had been important enough to bury and forget. The body in the chamber was, by the time the scholars found it, almost indistinguishable from the stone around it. The figure had been a man once. The shape of one was still legible, if you looked carefully. Broad shoulders, long arms, a face whose features had been smoothed by age, the way a coin in a riverbed loses its image. What held him in place was not for restraint, it was for ceremony. Whoever had put him there knew he would not wake on his own. The danger had always been someone else coming for him. What he was, in life, the world has only fragments to say. He was old, in a way the word old fails to mean. Older than what kept him still. Older than the city that buried him. Older than the kingdoms that would later rise around him and never know he was there. What survives of those ages calls him a primeval man, which is not a name so much as an admission that there is no name large enough. He was from a time before the stories began, from a time when humanity was new and small and had not yet decided what it would become. He had a soul. That much is clear. A soul of a kind that was rare even when the world was young, and almost unknown by the time he was buried. The fragments that survive about him imply something specific, though they never say it outright, whose breaking, if it ever came, would not stay contained to him, whose damage would not stay in one place. He had not broken. Not yet. He had been put to sleep before he could. What put him to sleep is unclear. The chamber holds no signs of struggle. What kept him still showed no sign of strain. There is no mark on the stone of any battle. Whoever did this to him did it gently. With effort, certainly. With ceremony. But not with violence. The image that has come down through what little remains of those ages is of someone being laid to rest by people who loved him too much to harm him and feared him too much to let him keep going. Which is its own kind of grief, when you think about it. The kind of grief where the only thing left to do for someone is to stop them. Where love is no longer enough to hold them in the world they were going to break. He was holding the pendant when they put him down. Whoever put him down, let him keep it. That detail, more than anything else, tells you something about how he had been loved. They did not take it from him. They closed his hand around it. And then they buried him under a city that had not yet been built. They laid the foundations of Oolacile across his sleeping shoulders. They forgot, on purpose, what he was. They wanted the next generations not to know. They wanted him left alone. The serpent who came to Oolacile ages later knew exactly what was down there. He had been waiting for a kingdom curious enough to dig. The serpent's name was Cartha. The records that survive call him a primordial serpent, which is again less a name than an acknowledgement that there is no easy way to say what he was. He had been around for a very long time. He had ideas about how the world should be. The world was not, at the moment of his arrival in Oolacile, going the way he wanted. There were two serpents in the histories. Frampt aligned himself with the gods, with the Age of Fire, with the order Lord Gwyn had built. Cartha wanted something different. Cartha was waiting for the age that came after, the Age of Dark. The age, as he understood it, of humanity coming into its own. What he wanted was not, on its own, evil. The world had been built around an order that asked humanity to forget what it was, to kneel, to be small, to accept that the gods were the true shape of the universe and that the dark in human souls was a flaw, not a feature. Cartha disagreed with this. He believed humanity carried its own sun, and that one day that sun would rise. He was not wrong about that. He was wrong about how to make it happen. He was, more importantly, willing to do almost anything to bring it forward. When he came to Oolacile, he came as a teacher. He spoke to the scholars in a voice that sounded like wisdom because it asked the right questions. He told them their sorceries were beautiful but young. He told them the world had older magic, older still than gold. He told them that there were things buried beneath their feet that, if awakened, could lift them above the kingdoms that called themselves great. He told them that knowledge had no obligation to keep itself safe, that a sleeping power was a wasted one, that the mark of a true scholar was the courage to look directly at what the past had been afraid of. The scholars of Oolacile listened. The scholars of Oolacile, who had been raised on the patience of their gardens and the gentleness of their elders, listened to a serpent whose voice sounded like every wise teacher they had ever known. He did not tell them what was under their city, not in plain words. He told them there was something. He told them it had been put there for a reason that no longer applied. He told them that whatever fear had buried it was an artifact of an age the world had outgrown. He let them work the rest out themselves. That was the elegance of him. He did not need to lie outright. He needed only to suggest, and to wait, and to let curiosity finish the work. By the time the first lantern was lit on the stairway down, Cartha had not asked them to do anything. They had decided, all on their own, that this was a kindness, that waking the sleeper was a gift to their kingdom, that history would remember them as the ones who restored a forgotten greatness to the world. History would, in fact, not remember them at all. Their names would not survive. Oolacile itself would not survive. The kingdom they thought they were enriching with this gift would, within a generation, be a place that the maps stopped including. Travelers would not pass through it. Pilgrims would not visit. There would be nothing to visit. The dark would have eaten the streets, the gardens, the lamps that ran with gold. The serpent who guided them had a reason for all of this. It was not the reason they thought it was. We will come back to that. The chamber was lit by lantern when she stepped down to him. She had been taught what to say. There were words for this. Old words found in scrolls Cartha had kindly helped them locate. Scrolls whose age the scholars trusted because age was something they had been raised to revere. She spoke the words. She did not understand what they meant. The serpent had not explained them. He had said it was better that way. The waking should be a pure act, he said. The will should be the only ingredient. She spoke them anyway. What happened next, what survives of the scholar's account, describes in language that becomes increasingly unreliable. It says only that the air in the chamber changed. The light from her lantern bent. The vines that had been growing through his armor curled slowly inward, as if something underneath them was pulling. The moss across his chest darkened, then ran wet, then ran black. What had held him still for ages began to tighten on its own. He opened his eyes. He did not know where he was. That is the most important thing to understand about what happened next. He did not know who had woken him. He did not know how long he had been gone. He did not know that the world above him was no longer the world he had been put to sleep in. He did not know that the people who had loved him were dust. He did not know that the hand of whoever had closed his fingers around the pendant, whoever had put it there on purpose before he was sealed away, was no longer attached to anything that could be found. He knew only that something he had been holding was missing. His hand was empty. He looked at his hand and saw that it was empty, and he did not understand. He had been holding something. He had been holding it for so long that his fingers had grown into the shape of holding it. The shape was still there. The thing was not. He began to look for it. Imagine, for a moment, what that was. Imagine waking from a sleep so deep that time has gone past you the way water passes a stone. Imagine the only continuity you have between then and now is a small object you remember being held in your hand. Imagine reaching for it and not finding it. Imagine reaching further and further, and the reach itself becoming the only thing you are. That is what Manus did. Not in malice, not in rage. He reached. The reach went through the chamber walls. It went up through the stone. It went into the streets of Oolacile, the gardens, the lamps. It went through the bodies of the scholars who had come down to wake him, who had been so proud of what they were doing. It went through them and kept going. The abyss, as the world would come to know it, did not exist before they woke him. That is the line the histories should have written, and did not. The dark in the human soul had always been there, quiet, contained, the small shadow that gives a person their shape. What spread out of Manus that night was something else. It was the dark amplified by a soul old enough and powerful enough to make it visible. It was a single grief, large enough to warp the world it touched. It was one man looking for a small thing, and the universe rearranging itself in answer. Oolacile was the first to fall. The gardens went black. The lamps went black. The scholars who had not yet died in the chamber died in the streets, screaming, becoming the things they had spent their lives trying to study. The princess was taken. Dusk was pulled into the dark, alive, by a hand that did not know what it was doing. He was reaching for the pendant. She was caught in the reach. That was all. That is the most cruel detail in the entire story. He did not mean any of it. What was happening to the world was not the act of a monster. It was the involuntary motion of a man who had just woken up and could not find what he had been holding when he fell asleep. Word reached Anorlondo. The city of the gods, perched on its high stone in a different sphere of the world, received the news that a kingdom in the south had fallen to a darkness no one could name. The reports were fragmentary. The reports were panicked. The reports were enough. Lord Gwyn dispatched his 4 knights. The story we are following concerns only one of them. His name was Artorias. He was tall and serious and quiet, and he walked everywhere accompanied by a wolf the size of a small horse, whom he called Sif. Sif was not his pet. Sif was his friend, and the records, when they touch on it, are clear about the difference. They had been together since Sif was a cub. Artorias had found her, or she had found him. The histories disagree gently on this point. In a winter so hard that the wolves of the deeper forests came down to the edges of human places, most of them died. The cub did not. Artorias took her home. She slept at the foot of his bed. She grew. She did not leave him. When Artorius rode for Oolacile, Sif rode with him. There was no question about it. What Artorius carried, besides his sword and his great shield, was a covenant. He had made an arrangement with the things that lived in the dark, with the beasts of the abyss themselves, in the form of a ring whose oath allowed its wearer to walk where humanity could not. He had done this for a reason. He believed, correctly, that fighting the abyss from the outside would not work. He believed that to truly contain it, you had to be able to enter it. He had volunteered to be the one who could. This was the kind of person Artorius was. He understood, before anyone else did, that this was not the kind of fight where you stood at a wall with a sword. He understood that to stop what was happening to Oolacile, someone was going to have to walk into the dark itself. He had not asked anyone else to do it. He had prepared himself alone over years for the possibility that one day it would be necessary. Then it became necessary. So he went. There is something worth holding about that ring. To enter the abyss, you had to be in covenant with what lived in it. And what lived in it, what gave it shape, what made it the size of the world, was Manus. Manus's grief swelled past anything human. The ring on Artorius's finger, then, was tied by oath to the very thing he was being sent to destroy. The covenant let him walk where Manus walked. There has always been a kind of poetry in the worst, stories about how closely the cure resembles the disease, and about what the cure has to bind itself to in order to work. Artorius and Sif rode for Oolacile. They reached the edge of what was left of it. The city was already gone by the time they arrived. The gardens were unrecognizable. The lamps were out. What walked the streets was no longer the people who had built them. The scholars had become things that drifted and screamed and reached. Artorius did what he had come to do. He walked into the dark. There is something darker in this story than the cure resembling the disease. The legend has not yet broken open. When it does, you will see why Sif waits. The abyss is not a place. The maps will not show you where it is. It does not have a coastline. It does not appear on any chart of the surface world. The closest thing to a description that survives is that it is what is underneath. Underneath what, the records do not say. The abyss is the underneath of everything. When you walk into it, what survives suggests you walk through your own thoughts. The dark you encounter is not external. It is whatever in you was already dark, brought forward, given weight, given a body. The abyss does not hate you. The abyss is not trying to hurt you. The abyss is showing you yourself. For most beings, this is not survivable. The dark in a human soul is small, but it is still there. The abyss takes that small thing and makes it the size of the world. The entity that walks back out, if anything walks back out, is no longer the entity that walked in. Artorius had prepared for this. He had spent years training his mind. He had made the covenant. He had the ring on his hand. He had Sif at his side. He believed he could do this. He had reason to believe it. He walked into the abyss. Sif walked in with him. What happened in there was not witnessed by anyone who survived to tell it. The histories have to piece together what happened from what was found afterward. From the position of bodies, from the broken weapons, from the great shield planted into the ground in a perfect circle of light with the wolf inside it. That is one of the things that did happen, and it is a true thing, and it is the most important thing Artorius did in this story. Before he fell, before whatever was happening to him became unstoppable, he understood that he was going to lose. He understood that Sif who had walked into the dark with him, was going to be lost too if he did not act. So he planted his great shield, his enormous great shield, in a circle on the ground, and he placed Sif inside it, and the shield's old enchantment held the dark at bay. The wolf was protected. The knight was not. He kept going. He had to. He could not bring Sif with him. He could not turn around. He went forward into the dark on his own, the only person in the world prepared to do what he had been sent to do, and the dark took him. What it took him into is hard to describe. There are fragments, bits of writing on objects recovered later from where he fell, scraps of testimony, the broken pieces of his sword and his shield, and what they suggest is that Artorias did not die quickly. He did not die at all. Technically, not the way we mean it. He was changed. The Abyss made him into a version of himself that the original version would not have recognized. His sword was broken, his great shield was abandoned, his armor was darkened, his mind was no longer his. The knight who walked into the Abyss did not walk back out. What walked out was something the Abyss had assembled in the shape of him. The shape was correct. The contents were not. Sif, in her circle of light, waited for him. She would wait for him for a long time. Manus was still reaching, somewhere deeper than anyone had yet gone. The pendant was still missing. The dark was still spreading. And Artorias, the only person in the world who had been sent to stop any of it, was now part of it. This is the part of the story where the legend stops matching the truth. There is a story the world tells about Artorias. The story goes like this. The knight rode south to Oolacile. The knight walked into the Abyss. The knight slew Manus, the father of darkness, and saved the kingdom. The knight emerged from the dark with his wolf at his side, broken and beautiful and victorious. The knight became, in the records of the lands that came after, the hero of the age. Artorias, the Abyss Walker, the man who proved that the dark could be entered and survived. The patron saint of every order that came afterward to fight the Abyss in his name. Statues were built, songs were composed, children were told his story. He is, in the world's memory, the closest thing to an unequivocal hero anyone in this story ever produced. None of it is true. He fell. He never reached Manus. He never struck the killing blow. The Abyss took him, the way it takes everything. And what came back out was not Artorias. The legend of Artorias the Abyss Walker is a beautiful and entirely fictional account of what should have happened. The world needed a hero. The world had a knight whose ending it could not bear. The world made a different ending and put it in the books and forgot, on purpose, that it had done so. This is something to sit with. The most famous heroic figure of an entire age, the knight whose name is invoked by every covenant, every order, every legacy that comes after, is a story the world wrote on top of a tragedy. He did not save Oolacile. He went in, and he fell, and the kingdom died around his fall. What actually happened to Manus is stranger than the legend, and it is in some ways more terrible. Someone else struck him down, someone whose name is not in the books, someone who was not from that age, someone who, in fact, was not even from a part of the world that existed at the same time as the events we have been describing. The dark of Manus's reach, that great, blind, searching dark, extended through more than space. It extended through time. It opened, somewhere far in the future, a small tear in the fabric of the world. And someone walked through it. That person was not Artorias. They never met Artorias, except as a fallen thing in the dark, who they put down with mercy because there was nothing left of him to save. They never met Sif until later. They never carried a banner. They never made an oath. They never asked, and were never told, that the kingdom they were saving had a name. They simply did the work that needed to be done. They struck Manus down. They saved Princess Dusk. They walked back out the way they had come, through the small tear in time, and arrived in their own age, where no record of any of this would exist, where Oolacile, by then, was already a few scattered ruins underneath a dark forest, where Artorias was already a statue, where Sif was already an old grey-muzzled wolf sitting alone at her old friend's grave. The hero of this story has no name we know. The hero of this story has a job that nobody in their own time understands they did. The hero of this story is, in the way the world remembers things, nobody. That is the truth beneath the legend. The legend is a kindness. The legend is what people tell themselves when the actual story is too painful to keep. The legend made Artorias into a hero because the alternative was to admit that Artorias had not been saved, and that no one in the world Oolacile lived in had been able to do what Artorias had been sent to do. Someone else did it. Someone the world will never see. The fight, when it happened, did not last long. The Chosen One, whose name no record kept, found Manus where the great searching reach had finally come to ground. He was no longer recognizable as the man who had slept under Oolacile. He was something larger, something more diffuse. His hand, the one that had been open all those ages ago around the small thing he had been holding, was now the size of a tower. The reach of his arm was the size of a sky. He was not, anymore, anything that had a face, but the hand was still open, and it was still searching. The Chosen One had been brought here through a tear in time made by Manus's own grief. What survives suggests they did not understand fully what they had been pulled into. They were a soldier doing the next thing in front of them. They had stepped near a small, strange tear in the air, and something on the other side had reached through and pulled them in. They were in Oolacile during its fall. They had no means of returning. The only way back was through, so they did the work. They found Sif, alive in her circle of light, and freed her. They found Artorias, fallen, and put him to rest. They followed the long, terrible reach of the abyss to its source. When they came to Manus, what survives suggests there was a pause. The great hand turned. It noticed them. For a single moment, the searching paused on something that was not the pendant, but might be. The Chosen One was not the thing he was looking for, but the Chosen One was, briefly, in the way. What happened in that moment is not preserved. The fight that followed was. It was long and brutal and lit by the strange purple light of the dark itself, and it ended the way fights in this story tend to end. The Chosen One survived. Manus did not. The reach went still. The hand, the great open hand, descended slowly back to the stone. The fingers curled, on instinct, around something they expected to find. They did not find it. They closed on nothing. He died still searching. That is the detail you should carry, of all the details in this story. He died still searching. The pendant was never found. The thing that had been put in his hand by someone who loved him, in an age the world no longer remembered, was gone. He had reached across continents and ages for it. He had unmade a kingdom in the reaching. He had broken a night in the reaching. He had pulled a stranger through time in the reaching, and when the reaching was finally over, the hand closed on nothing. He never knew what had happened to the pendant. He died holding the absence of it. That is the shape of the abyss. That is what it is, underneath everything. It is the shape of a hand that does not know what it lost. When a soul that large breaks, it does not break cleanly. The fragments of Manus's soul did not stay where he died. They scattered. The records that survive, the writing left on small objects, the names attached to certain sorceries, the things found in the centuries after by people who never knew what they were holding, all suggest that pieces of him spread far across the world. They lodged in beings. They lodged in objects. They lodged in places. They are still there. The princess, Dusk, was returned to her own age. The world she returned to had no Oolacile to receive her. She was, by then, the last of her people. She was, at some point in the centuries that followed, sealed inside a small golden statue, by what means and by whose hand the records do not say. She was found much later by someone passing through. She did not remember most of what had happened to her. She remembered being held. She remembered a great hand closed around her, and she remembered vaguely that the hand had not crushed her, that it had not even tried. Whatever the dark had done to him, whatever he had become by then, some old part of him had still known the difference between a small living thing and the thing he was looking for. He had held her carefully. The dark she had been pulled through never quite left her. It is in her sorceries. It is in the way she speaks. She does not know exactly what happened. She knows only that something kept her alive in that dark. Something that had no reason to be kind was kind anyway. Something that, even at the worst end of its grief, did not want to hurt the small living thing it was holding. That is the last detail of him that the world keeps. Not that he was a monster, not that he ended a kingdom, not that he warped a night and broke a legend. That, in the middle of his unmaking, while the universe was rearranging itself in answer to his grief, he held a princess in his great searching hand and did not crush her. Some of his fragments became sorceries that crackle with violet light. Some became artifacts, small in the hand, that can be felt to hum with an intent that does not feel quite like anyone else's. Some lodged in dark wraiths and other beings of the abyss, who do not understand why they feel a tug they cannot name, in a direction they cannot point to. Some, the worst fated, lodged in people who survived the fall of Oolacile, who carried the small piece of him with them into kingdoms that did not yet exist, and felt their entire lives a strange grief that did not belong to them. We are still living among those pieces. The dark in any human, the small shadow that gives them their shape, is the same kind of dark that he was. The original was simply louder. The dark in any one of us, magnified to the scale of his soul, would do what he did, would reach, would search, would not stop until something was found, or until the searching itself was ended. That is what humanity is, in this world's understanding. Not a flaw, not a corruption, a muted version of the same thing he was. He was not a separate species. He was us, with the volume, turned all the way up. And the fact that any one of us can hold a small piece of him in our hand and not be destroyed by it is the only reason the world has not ended. He was a man. Even at the end, he never stopped being a man. The chamber is dark again, the way it had been before any of this began. What had held him still is gone. The vines have not yet returned. The lantern that was set on the third step from the bottom, by a young scholar who believed she was performing a gift, is no longer there. Whatever became of her, the records do not say. The body at the center of the room is no longer recognizable. The shape of a man is no longer legible there. The moss has not yet had time to grow. What is left is something the universe is patiently taking back. the way it takes everything. There is a hand against the stone. The fingers are slightly curled, as if they were holding something, although nothing is in them. They have been arranged that way by the gentleness of the position, not by any will that remains. The pendant is not on the floor. It is not in the chamber. It is not anywhere in the world that the maps describe. Whatever happened to it, in the long ages between his sleeping and his waking, has erased it. He never found it. He died holding the place where it had been. The story under all the histories, beneath the legend of the Abyss Walker and the fall of Oolacile and the scattered pieces of a soul spread through the centuries, is this. He was a man. He had been loved once by people who were no longer there. He had been holding a small thing they had given him. He woke in a world that had forgotten them, and forgotten him, and forgotten, on purpose, what they had buried under their city. And in the dark of his confusion, he reached for the only thing that proved any of it had ever happened. He could not find it. He never stopped looking. There is something in that any of us who have lost someone might recognize. The reach for the small object. The pocket checked again for the thing that should have been there. The drawer opened again, in the hope that this time the photograph might have remembered to be inside it. It is not the same. He was not the same. But the shape is the same. The hand is the same. If you have ever been searching, in the dark of a long night, for something you could not name and would not find, this story has been about you, in the smallest way. You are not the dark. The dark is only a measure of how much you have loved. If these stories are bringing you to rest, please consider following along. The hand goes still. The chamber goes quiet. The lantern, somewhere ages above and ages below, has long since burned out. The world above keeps turning, and the people in it carry their small pieces of him without knowing what they are carrying, and the dark in each of them is just the dark, just the small shadow that gives them their shape, and most of them will be all right. He never found the pendant. Whatever it had meant, whoever had given it to him, is gone with him. It is enough now to let it be gone. Let your eyes close. There is no hurry. We have the whole night.